Jonbon, you cannot jump like that and win a Queen Mother Champion Chase. That's a horrible mistake. And he was hanging to the left after that. You often see horses make a mistake like that, and then a couple of weeks later it emerges, they've got strained ligaments or there's a muscle damage and they're going to miss a key race. I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised if he ended up missing Cheltenham on the back of that.
I had mentioned earlier in the podcast on his season debut that I was worried about the fact that he had a hard race here when Nico probably made a little bit too much use of him. I was worried that this could have had a lasting effect further on down the line in the season. Might have seen a little bit here, but it's not ideal now to see him have another seriously hard race here for the second time, coming into Cheltenham just around the corner, and it could put him in jeopardy for the Champion Chase title. Not ideal coming into Cheltenham off the back of 2 hard runs at the same track. And like you said, I hope it hasn't had any lasting effect on him. I thought he was actually very good over the first 3 fences, and I thought he'd actually got into a nice rhythm early on, and he was settling well. His jumping was very neat and tidy. He lost his rhythm completely over the 4 down the back. His jumper just went to pot. He just couldn't meet one on the right stride, and he was kind of on the back foot from here on in. You can't be afford to be doing this in a race like this. You need to be in a good rhythm throughout. In the 2 mile chase division, you just can't make a mistake, especially around Cheltenham over 2 miles. I just thought the 4 flowers was the crucial point in the race, and he just completely misjudged it and just landed on top of it. Something similar happened here at the same fence with So Scottish at Cheltenham. The previous meeting, he did something similar. He misjudged it completely and landed on top of it. It's a tricky fence. They're coming downhill slightly, and they're kind of starting to get racing at this point, and it can catch a few horses out. And I actually think complete credit to James for staying on him. I don't think he deserved any of the hardship he probably had to entail for this. I thought he actually gave this horse a beautiful ride from here on in. Credit to James now. He could have rushed him back. He could have panicked and tried to get him back into contention too quickly. But he had the patience to just sit and wait and let the horse kind of find his feet, fill him back up again and get him into a rhythm. He gave him every chance to win this race from here on in. And I actually thought coming down second last, he kind of was going to pull it out of the bag. He just kind of made another error at the last, just lost his momentum, didn't quite land running. And Elixir De Nutz just got the kind of upper hand here, and he just kind of he actually landed running at the back of the fence, and he just got away from him. I thought if Jonbon had kind of landed running, I think he probably would have kept his head in front, but he left his race at the 4th last, and that just completely bottomed him completely after kind of missing the last. I actually think it was a very good performance to finish where he did. I think he's had 2 very hard races this season. Might not pay off, but I did say at the start of the season I'd love to see him over 2 mile 4, and I think if he was in the Ryanair, he'd be a serious horse for that. Looking at the way he runs, and he might just see him more in the comfort zone, especially with his jumping, and he might just see him get back more into rhythm and give him more of a chance over that trip. But he's not in it, so looks like he'll either be going to Champion Hurdle or he won't be running anywhere, I'd say.
Champion Chase. Even that early season form with Edwardstone, that's not looking good now either.
I think Edwardstone, I spoke to someone fairly close to the horse the other day, and they there were some people quite close to the horse who were convinced it wouldn't stay 2.5. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. What I'll say about Jonbon, I'm going to add as much context to this as I can, so that I'm showing I'm being completely fair. When you give Nico a horse like a Jonbon or a Shishkin or an Altior that has a lot of scope, or even a Swinter Sacra, he's very, very positive on them. Like, I mean, he's throwing them at near enough every fence. And you've seen on Altior, was it in the Arkle? There's one fence he sat still and the horse nearly fell. Because when you keep asking a horse, it keeps expecting to be asked. And I think, in a way, what's happened here is Nico's ridden that horse how he rode it round the Schlur and in the Tingle Creek, and that's his style, and it works for him. I think every time James Bowen sat still on this horse, it made a mistake. And I think there was a stride there at the third last, and I think there was a stride there at the last. And he sat where most jockeys would sit, but Nico wouldn't, if that makes sense. I'm not saying James Bowen gave this horse a bad ride. I think his style, the horse that's had Nico on it the last time, I think his style has maybe clashed with Nico's slightly. When you keep asking a horse, it expects to be asked. You see what happened with Enter de Gite when Niall had to sit still at the third? He had to sit still there, and the horse just stepped out of his hands. That's where stepping can come from with horses, is when they're being asked long all the time. The first time you sit still, they step out your hands. And I just think this horse at the third last, James went, right, okay, sit and pop now. He went, what? And he's made a horrific mistake. And again, I think there was a stride there at the last, and James is half sort of minding him, trying not to give him too hard a race, and he sat still, and the horse is just sort of, he hasn't made too much of a mistake, but he's lost enough ground to maybe, he might have got away with one, I think. But then if he's thrown him at the last, maybe whatever might come out in the next couple of days, he might have exacerbated an injury that had already occurred to the horse. But that's my take on it. I'm not saying James Bowen's given this horse a bad ride. I think his style has clashed with Nico's on this horse, if that makes sense.
It does. Is James's style more similar to Aidan Coleman's?
Yes.
Jonbon is used to that style, but because Nico's ridden him twice and then been asking him for once, he's now expecting that, and then that's not happening.
It's much easier for a horse to go from being ridden how Aidan rides a horse to being ridden how Nico rides a horse. It's much easier. A horse that's used to popping, asking them up, because the worst they do is put down and get away with it. It's easier for them to get used to that than to go from being sent at every fence to learning to pop. Because if you say no and they say yes, you're probably going to end up on the floor. Whereas the other way round, they can sort of just put down on you. They might lose a length or two, but they get away with it. Once you rev a horse up, it's very hard to put that genie back in the bottle. Because it's much easier to wake a horse up that's used to being put to sleep.
That's an excellent point, George. That's a really excellent observation. Out of interest, would James have said to him, look, you do it yourself coming to the last? Has he done that because he's managed to get himself back into contention? He's in the lead. He's basically got Elixir De Nutz covered. So instead of asking him for a big leap where he's got a couple wrong early, he's decided, you do it now, son. And then Jonbon just hasn't come up for him.
Exactly. And because there was one there. It's a big one, but you're talking about Jonbon here. Like, this is a horse with bags of scope. The big one was on. But say, look, James Bowen could well be vindicated. If it turns out this horse picked up a slight injury in that bad mistake at the third last, he could have done him some real damage potentially by sending him at the last. He might have saved this horse from a much bigger injury. So it's hard to say what was going through James's head, whether he's thinking, I'll just pop this because I've got this one, or is he thinking, I'm going to look after this horse, and if we get beat, so be it. I only he knows that. But I just wanted to be as even-handed with that as possible and explain fully what I meant. So I'm not jumping on the bash James Bowen train at all. It's especially, like I say, for a buzzy horse like him, it's very difficult to go from Nico's style to James's style. But especially, they're saying he's probably gone there a bit fresh as it is. You watch how sort of keen going he was at the start. When James didn't have a choice, when the horse was coming up long before him, that was the best he jumped. The second he settled, and then it's up to James, do I give him a squeeze or do I sit still? That's when the jumping started to go to bits.
What do you make of him sweating so profusely beforehand? Like he's done this a couple of times now, but
I'd worry more if it was a horse that had never done it before, but he has done. And look, I find it very hard to get too worked up about horses sweating in the paddock. The amount of times I've seen a horse that's never sweated before sweat up in the paddock and then go and win for me. And you're just like, oh, like this was whatever reason he was really up for it and he sweated up. Like, it can be a positive. With a horse that's as revvy as him, it's probably not a positive, but I wouldn't be getting too worked up about it. I know Nicky made his comments during the week, but maybe that did have something to do with it. It certainly wouldn't have made it easier to settle him. Obviously, like he was definitely more forward going than we're used to seeing after the first few fences.
So his comments during the week were, "I had him spot on for Ascot. I don't like the fact that he's not had his race, and now we have to wait 7 days." Do you buy into that?
It certainly it would have contributed towards him sweating up and how free going he was over the first few, but it would have had nothing to do with where the jumping then went to bits.
Yeah. Katie, what did you make of that excuse from Nicky? He's coming up with a lot of excuses lately.
Yeah, I can see two sides of it. Like, I think British trainers train them slightly differently to Irish trainers. Like, if I kind of the vibe I'm getting over here is if they miss a week, it's not they don't think it's the end of the world. Like, they don't like train them in the same regards as what UK trainers do. I think they kind of have their work down to a T to like the exact day they want before they run. And where with trainers I've worked over here, it doesn't really like they don't really put in like a work plan for every race. It's just they try and keep it a bit more simple over here, if you get me. Whereas I feel like Nicky kind of has it down to a T to have the horse in the exact shape he wants it for a certain race, and if it's delayed by weeks, then it kind of puts it into uproar. Is the way I'm feeling that is, and that's the way he kind of trains. But it works for him. But kind of over here, like with Willie and that, it's a bit more free going. It's not the end of the world if it's put back a week. He still had them in the same shape, and he wouldn't be worried about them. But with kind of Jonbon, like we have seen him jump left on occasions before. Like that's not something new. Like he has done it in his novice chase season. We have seen him do it, and I did see Nicky. I think it was he put up a video of him trotting up the day after, and he looked absolutely fine. So I would be surprised if he picked up any injury. Like he looked like he was trotting out to his chin to me. So
that's good. Yeah.
So I think in that respect, I hope he's well, unless anything comes up in the future. But he looked sound to me, and they seem to be happy with him post race. So in that respect, I think he's okay. But yeah, but then just Nicky trains probably just differently than a lot of trainers do over here, and that's kind of the point I'm getting at, maybe.
Like I think Katie, what you're getting at is over here we're a bit more obsessed with like target training.
Yeah.
Like we pick a day 4 weeks out and we train them to be absolutely at their peak at that race.
Yeah.
Well, in Ireland, particularly like Gordon and Willie and that, it's more of a sort of they get into their routine and they get fit through their racing. Like they'll be fit enough when they go to the races first time out, but they sharpen up with each run. They're not sharpened up at home. Whereas we'd sharpen them at home for a specific race, which is probably why Willie's keep improving throughout the season. But it's also why I say Paul Nicholls is the best man to target one race with one horse. You know what I mean? Like it's a different way of doing it, and it probably doesn't, unless we're using Cheltenham as our only target. It probably counts against English trainers come Cheltenham time, because you can only bring a horse to a peak like that so many times before you get sort of diminishing returns.
Yeah. And like with Willie, I think that's why you see they don't have a bad run first time out, but they're not even at like 50% of of their capabilities. And I think that's why in April at Punchestown, they're just blowing everything completely out the water, because he's just gradually building them up to Punchestown. It's like a stepping stone, whereas I think like Paul Nicholls, Nick Henson, they can just go straight up to the peak race, and then it's like, where do you go from here? And if it puts back a week,
2 weeks off after.
Yeah, because they have them like they have them over kind of boiling point, to run well, and it is just two completely different training styles. And it works for both types of trainers. It works in their own rights as well. So I'm not knocking either of their training styles, but yeah, it is very interesting to note. And yeah, George explained it very well.
Plus, we have to target train over here because we have to win as many races as we can before the Irish turn up in March.
For the Irish take
that
over.
wasn't always the case, though.
We have to have them at their peak nice and early, so we can at least win all our own races before you show up.
Yeah.
Well, we know that JP very much wants to win the Queen Mother Champion Chase. It seems pretty obvious to me that Jonbon's not going to be good enough to win a Queen Mother Champion Chase. But there is a solution, Katie. Put Jonbon in the Ryanair. Put Dino Blue in the Champion Chase.
Bride's Hill wins the Mayor's Chase. It's all coming together.
Yes, Georgie boy! Now, Willie Mullins might not like this, but Willie Mullins can go and have a song and dance for himself because this is all about Frankie Tightlips and JP.
It could all turn around this weekend if El Fabiola was disappointing and then it completely blows out the water and they're a completely level playing field coming into this. So there is the chance of it. And then all of a sudden there's going to be hype back on Jonbon saying, oh, he could probably win now. So I wouldn't be writing them off just yet. And like, if Nicky can really work his magic to get this horse back, it's going to be a tough ask, but with 2 tough runs under his belt. But I wouldn't be writing him off just yet. But I do think he is more of a Ryanair type. He's not in it, so we'll have to wait and see if he does supplement it. But as you said, they're keen for the Champion Chase, so I wouldn't be surprised if they just ran him anyway. If
Come on, Frankie Tightlips. Put him in the Ryanair. You know it makes sense. Dino Blue into the Champion Chase. Let's go.
This is another kind of point why, and everyone kind of gives out about Willie and he enters them in all races. This is why you need to cover all angles because the season is long and it develops over time. You think at the start of the season the horse will be suitable for this race, but after a couple of runs, you think actually no, then we might be suitable for a different race. And I think this is where Willie, he spends a lot of money on entry fees, but he's covering all options and all angles in case something like this does happen. And it is a good point to know. I know it's annoying for punters because he's entered every horse in every race, but it gives him options. And I think that is like the big point to make is he's so many options for these horses. He doesn't have to think, oh, I wish I entered this horse in there. I think he'd be more suitable for that. He has every angle covered coming into Cheltenham with every single horse.
Which makes it all the more perplexing that he didn't put Capodanno in the call.
Yeah, that could be more of JP's kind of where he kind of makes, and Frankie B, they make the decisions with them. But with his own kind of other owners, he does tend to enter them everywhere.
Yeah.
So that could just be just an owner's kind of what they want to do more than anything. But Willie in general enters them anything he can in every race.
Yeah, Rich Ritchie and Donnelly's contribution to the BHA entry fund would be significantly higher than JP's, but that penny pinching from JP may very well have backfired on them spectacularly. Let's give Freddie Gingell his flowers. First Grade 1 win for him. First Grade 1 win extraordinarily for Joe Tissart as well. You'd think he won one by now, but he's a fabulous trainer. That moment itself, Katie, for Freddie and for Joe, particularly the emotion for Freddie, it's obviously meant the world to them.
As much as we probably want to see Jonbon win it's great to see a trainer getting their first Grade 1 winner and a young fella as well getting his first Grade 1. You know, it's kind of magical, and it's a day they'll never forget. At the age of 10, I don't know if he'd be able to repeat this, and this probably was his pinnacle in his career, and I think they're right to kind of savor this. So I'll savor every moment of this because I'd be surprised if they could replicate this. But yeah, couldn't take away from Joe Tissart and Freddie Gingell. It was a great day for them both. But they did I think Elixir De Nutz made the most of a poor round of jumping from Jonbon to land this here.
But I do have a question for you, George. In your riding days, when you crossed the line having beaten a fellow jockey, did you ever turn and not look at the crowd, look directly in your rival jockey's face and start waving your whip and giving it socks?
Not quite that, but maybe. This is me we're talking about. Like, it didn't happen very often. I wouldn't have been waving my whip around a whole lot, and I say that your listeners will dig out one of me with my stick straight up in the air at power and point to point, I'm sure. But I wouldn't have been waving my stick around very often anyway. I might have made the odd comment to the other jockeys when you come back in, maybe. You don't always get on, do you? Like, especially when you're young and stupid as well, and you sort of, it really, really matters, like, who's doing what, and, like, especially talking about young riders like that, and you think, if he's riding a winner, it's a winner I'm not riding, sort of thing. I don't know their personal relationship, but it might just be one of those things. They have a healthy rivalry because they're both You know, how old would James Byrne be? 20?
Yeah, about that. Yeah, 2022.
Yeah, and Freddie Gingel's 18 now, is he? Guys, they're in one's with Nicky, one's with sort of Joe Tizard. Actually, Freddie Gingel he's had rights for Nicky, hasn't he?
I think so.
Yeah. So that maybe it's more of a friendly thing, you know. They'd have ridden out together. Maybe it's more of a friendly thing. Who knows?
Yeah, that's true. It could just be a bit of bants between
I'm
the
not
lads.
sure James would have thought it was very funny.
No, I can't imagine he did. I really can't. And I thought it was interesting that it wasn't really picked up on by the media. But hey, that's what we're here for, to talk about the completely innocuous things that actually don't matter at all. But do either of you completely oppose my idea that Fugitive can win the Ryanair Chase?
Why not?
It's just such a weak renewal of it. They're going to go straight there with Envoy LN. And by the way, on the Final Furlong podcast, George put up Envoy LN at 14-1 for the Ryanair Chase. Well, he ain't 14-1 anymore. So again, if you followed us in, you're in a very healthy position. That day 3 of Cheltenham is either going to be absolute gold for us or a complete disaster.
What?
Yeah, one or the
There's
other.
already
Insert
some right
image.
stinkers in my anti-post portfolio, I will say. There's already some where you look down and go, oh, what are you doing? Let's be clear about it.
Yeah.
The season's gone on.
Yeah, that
not
didn't...
not as bad as my concluding Friday of Cheltenham bet on Constitution Hill to win the Arkle.
No, you didn't do that. There's no way you did that.
About a tenner, but a tenner I don't have anymore.
Yeah, it's a tenner. You're never getting back. I blame Nicky Henderson. Nobody forced Nicky to start banging on about how, well, we could go novice chasing with him. He could have just straight out said, no, he's a champion hurdler. We're not doing that. But he did indulge people with that idea. So
I just figured once he had an entry over fences, he wasn't going to be 10-1 anymore. So I took 10s.